Hey everyone. Yeah, so the first video, well, at this point of recording is nearly up to 100 views. So I thought, oh, this obviously works. So let's get into day two. Some of the feedback was let's do it on GitHub versus the web page. Makes sense. So I'll stick with that. But let me know what I should or shouldn't be doing, and we can enhance these as we go. So day two is, and I remember finishing off the first video with responsibilities of a DevOps engineer. So hopefully you are coming into this off the back of going through the resources and what we went through on day one. If not, go back, have a look at that, either from a video point of view or go and read, or both. It was briefly touched on in the first post, but now we must get deeper into the concept and understand that there are two main parts when creating an application. We have the development part, where software developers program the application and test it. Then we have the operations part, where the application is deployed and maintained on a server. I mentioned a bit about that in the last one. Let's get into it, and I'll pass on some judgment a couple of years later from publishing this. So to get to grips with DevOps, or the tasks which a DevOps engineer would be carrying out, we need to understand the tools or the process and overview of those and how they come together. Everything starts with the application. I think we can all agree with that, right? In this, doesn't matter whether you're using virtual machines, cloud-based PaaS workloads, SaaS workloads, we have to think about the application first, and then we get into everything else. Anyway, so everything starts with the application. It's probably one of the reasons why I've started another project that you'll see on the channel called Up the Stack, and getting to grips with some of the CNCF stuff. It's definitely talking about application first type mentality. You will see so much throughout. You will see so much throughout that it is all about the application when it comes to DevOps. Yeah, developers will create an application. This can be done with many different technology stacks, and let's leave that to the imagination for now as we get into this later. This can also involve many different languages, programming languages, build tools, code repositories, etc. As a DevOps engineer, you won't be programming the application, but having a good understanding of the concepts of how a developer works and the systems, tools, and processes that they are using is key to success. At a very high level, you are going to need to know how the application is configured to talk to all of its required services or data services, and then also sprinkle a requirement of how this can or should be tested. The application will need to be deployed somewhere. Let's keep it generally simple here and make this a server. Doesn't matter where, but a server. This is then expected to be accessed by the customer or end user, depending on the application that has been created. This server needs to run somewhere, on premises, in the public cloud, serverless. Okay, I've gone too far. We won't be covering serverless, but it's an option. And in fact, we do go back and cover serverless in 2023, so we will get there eventually. But it's an option, and more enterprises are heading this way. Someone needs to create and configure these servers and get them ready for the application to run. Now, this element might land to you as a DevOps engineer to deploy and configure these servers. These servers run an operating system, and generally speaking, this is going to be Linux. Linux, caveat. But we have a whole section, or week, where we cover some of the foundational knowledge you should gain here. It is also likely that we need to communicate with other services in our network or environment. So we also need to have that level of knowledge around networking and configuring that. Again, we cover that. This might, to some degree, also land at the feet of the DevOps engineer. Again, we will cover this in more detail in a dedicated section, talking about all things DNS, DHCP, load balancing, and all of that good stuff. Okay, so jack of all trades, master of none. I'll say at this point though, you don't need to be a network or infrastructure specialist. You need a foundational knowledge of how to get things up and running and talking to each other. Much the same as maybe having a foundational knowledge of a programming language, but you don't need to be a developer. However, you might be coming into this as a specialist in an area, and that is a great footing to adapt to other areas. Let me finish this and I'll touch on that. You will also most likely not take over the management of these servers for the daily application. We've been talking about the servers, but the likelihood is that your application will be developed to run as containers, which still runs on a server for the most part, but you will also need to need an understanding of not only virtualization, cloud infrastructure as a service, IaaS, but also containerization as well. The focus in these 90 days will be more catered towards containers. Yeah, we don't touch on virtualization. I think what my point here is that traditionally a systems administrator or that potentially evolved into being a DevOps engineer or part of a DevOps team, maybe platform engineering is being discussed now as well, is like, I go back to an Exchange admin, right? An Exchange admin would only look after the mail coming in and out of your estate, your environment. We don't really have that requirement anymore. Everyone's moved off to, not everyone, but a large majority have moved off into a SaaS-based offering such as Microsoft 365. So you don't need to be an Exchange expert anymore, but there was plenty of them. So what I mean by jack of all trades is that we have to not be dedicated a master of one particular area, but we're going to look after a lot. And that's kind of what the whole premise of this 90 days of DevOps is that we are first, this is the section where we're getting to know what is and how do we use DevOps, but then we get into individual items, whether it be programming language, networking, cloud-based workloads, etc. So we're going to get into that. Okay, so high level. On one side, we have our developers creating new features and functionality, as well as bug fixes for the application. On the other side, we have some sort of environment, infrastructure or servers, which are configured and managed to run this application and communicate with all its required services. The big question is, how do we get those features and bug fixes into our products and make them available to those end users or customers or whatever that end goal is? How do we release the new application version? This is one of the main tasks for a DevOps engineer, and the important thing here is not to just figure out how to do this once, but we need to be thinking about how we do this continuously and in an automated, efficient way, which also needs to include the testing of that deployment. This is where we are going to end this day of learning. Hopefully this was useful. Over the next few days, we are going to dive a little deeper into some other areas of DevOps, and then we will get into the sections and that dive deeper into the tooling and processes and the benefits of these. So added a few more variants and perspectives about what is DevOps. So I will say it again about, I'm always open to adding additional resources. I know that I'm not exhausting the amount of amazing content that is out there, that's free and available out there. So by all means, open up a pull request and submit your resources in here. You'll see from the main page that we check everything, but yeah, always open. And there's some pretty big names here, if you like so Tech World with Nano, I've mentioned her before. Some great content on YouTube. Go and spend a day, spend a week, spend a weekend watching that content. But then look at the big companies. GitHub, which is obviously now Microsoft, but GitHub, IBM, AWS, Microsoft, they give their takes on what is DevOps. So watch those videos. You're going to get a very good idea about what I'm talking about here as that roles and responsibilities of a DevOps engineer, although we're still at a very high level there. So if you made it this far, then you will know if this is where you want to be or not. So I'll be back in the next video where we talk on day 3. So let me finish it there. Awesome. Cheers.